England has descended into civil war. King Henry III and his royal army, having already fought the rebels at Northampton, London and Rochester, sets up camp at Lewes Priory. Prince Edward occupies the town's castle. Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, and his rebel army approaches. An exchange of letters carried by friars between the two camps fails to result in agreement. De Montfort and his followers withdraw their oaths of loyalty to the king and declare war. The sword waxed strong. Many fell. Truth prevailed, and the false fled.
Simon de Montfort arrived in England in the early 1230s to stake his claim to the earldom of Leicester. He brought with him money and mercenaries for Henry's latest military campaign to help win the king's favour. De Montfort and Henry were soon firm friends, and the Earl rose quickly at court. But a few years later, in 1238, this friendship was tested when de Montfort married the king's sister Eleanor in secret. The following year, Henry discovered de Montfort had borrowed the money he had used to secure his earldom, and told his lenders that the king would guarantee the debt. In front of the court, King Henry let loose his anger at de Montfort, accusing the Earl of seducing his sister and forcing his hand in allowing their marriage. Having fallen out of favour, de Montfort left England in 1240 to go on crusade. Just 2 years later though, de Montfort was back at the king's side after Henry's military campaign in Poitou failed. In 1248, de Montfort then helped Henry put down a revolt in Gascony. Back in England, however, there was growing discontent among the barons, the country's political elite and most powerful landowners. The barons were frustrated with Henry's failed foreign policy, his spiralling debts, and the king's tendency to surround himself with foreigners at court. Such complaints had been levelled at Henry's father, King John, resulting in attempts to limit the power of the crown with Magna Carta, and when this failed, civil war and foreign invasions. De Montfort emerged as the leader of the disgruntled barons and forced the king to agree to the Provisions of Oxford in 1258. This was in some ways an even more revolutionary document than Magna Carta, as it took away the king's power to choose his own chief ministers and gave this instead to a council of 15. Like the 1215 issue of Magna Carta, the Provisions of Oxford proved short-lived. In 1261, Henry successfully petitioned the Pope to annul the document, as his father had done with Magna Carta, and the king returned to ruling much as before. However, the precedent for a more representative and regular parliament contained in the provisions had now been set. The disgruntled barons turned once more to de Montfort for leadership. The Earl raised an army. Henry did the same. Just outside the town of Lewes, the two armies, led by the two brothers-in-law and former friends, met and engaged in battle. De Montfort's army enters Lewes and attacks the castle. Most of the town is set on fire by the castle archers, firing flaming arrows. Henry's brother, Richard, is captured at Snelling's Mill. The king withdraws to the nearby priory for safety. Prince Edward, his son, wants to come out and fight, but instead friars are sent to negotiate. The following morning, an agreement is reached. The Mise en Lewes. Henry surrenders his sword to Richard de Clare, one of de Montfort's trusted lieutenants. Both sides take hostages to ensure the other side abides by the agreement. Prince Edward and Henry de Clare, Richard's son. A new constitutional settlement, based on the 1258 Provisions of Oxford, is imposed on the king.
For the reform of the state of the realm of England, 3 prudent and faithful men shall be chosen, who shall have authority and power from the king to choose and nominate 9 councillors. By the councils of these 9, the king shall appoint the justicer, chancellor, treasurer, and other officials, great and small, in all things which concern the government of the realm.
First among these men stood de Montfort, king in all but name. On 14th of December 1264, de Montfort summoned a parliament, including knights representing the shires, and for the first time, burgesses, representatives of selected towns. The parliament convened in January of 1265. However, we should be under no illusions. De Montfort was no democrat. Among his motivations in making Parliament more representative was an attempt to widen his base of support, which was now decreasing among the barons, suspicious of his motives and power. De Montfort tried to buy baronial support back with a reissue of Magna Carta, reducing the amount of tax they had to pay to inherit their estates. However, these moves were not enough. When in 1265 de Montfort lost the support of Gilbert de Clare, the powerful Earl of Gloucester, Prince Edward saw his chance. The prince escaped custody and rallied an army to confront de Montfort at Evesham.
A wonderful conflict took place, there being slain on the field of battle Simon, Earl of Leicester, whose head and hands and feet were cut off.
The Battle of Evesham was a resounding victory for the Royalists, and de Montfort's mutilated body parts were sent across the kingdom as a warning to would-be traitors. His family, including his wife and the king's sister Eleanor, fled to France, ending the de Montforts as a political force in England. Eleanor became a nun at Montargis Abbey, where her sister-in-law was the abbess, and remained there for the rest of her life. Following his death, Simon was described as a martyr, and at the Abbey of Evesham, where his body was briefly buried, miracles were reported. He was also praised by some chroniclers.
Earl Simon, who gave up not only his property, but also his person, to defend the poor from oppression and for the maintenance of justice.
Henry, however, forbade reference to de Montfort as a saint. Today, King Henry is mostly remembered as the pious king who rebuilt Westminster Abbey, and Simon de Montfort is hailed as the Father of Parliament. However, as we have seen, both men were more complicated than we tend to remember. For a large part of his reign, many of Henry's barons felt the king was repeating the sins of his father John, and while de Montfort for a time made Parliament more representative, this was not without a measure of self-interest. Nevertheless, it was de Montfort's Parliament of 1265 that became the model for those summoned by Henry III's son Edward. The battle that took place in Lewes was therefore key to the development of parliamentary government in England.